Welcome to Motherhood. I'm Dr. Christina Hibbert, here to help you overcome, to become, and to flourish in this nourishing experience we call motherhood. And it sure can be nourishing as a mom, those moments that we have when our children are giving us cuddles or loves, or, those successes that we have in motherhood when things are actually going right for a while. But today we're going to focus on a different kind of nourishment, which is nutrition, and specifically nutrition for our mom mental health. And not only for our own mental health and our own well-being, but also for our family's well-being. And this is a topic that I think most of us need to learn a thing or two about. We all know we need to, quote, eat healthy, and we know that food is key in helping us to feel energized and live the kind of life that we want, but do we really know what to do? And I would say most of us don't always know what to do, including myself. So I'm really excited to introduce our fabulous guest today, who is the author of Nutrition Essentials for Mental Health. And we're going to be talking to her in just a minute. I'll introduce her. But first, I want to thank you all for joining me here each week and for joining us online on my website at drchristinahibbert.com, as well as through social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and especially in our Facebook group, Growing Through Motherhood. So if you'd like to join us, just ask to be added to the group, and we'd love to have you. It's a place where we can connect and hopefully support one another. Now, as I mentioned, I think this topic of nutrition is such a biggie. We have an idea in our head maybe of what we think nutrition looks like, and probably most of us focus on nutrition when we're just trying to look better or be healthier physically. But I'm sure you've heard that nutrition is key to our mental, emotional, spiritual, social health as well. And it goes right along with that topic of exercise that we've talked several times about on this show. With my latest book, 8 Keys to Mental Health Through Exercise. And really the two go hand in hand. But I think we often get stuck as far as what we can put into our bodies that can help give us that energy and that motivation and that, that happiness that we want in our lives, and feeling not only physically healthy, but mentally healthy. And then there's the whole question of what do we do with our kids, and how do we help them to put that nutrition into their bodies and to want to eat those kinds of things that help them to grow and develop in the ways that they should. Where do we even begin? So I've really been looking forward to this topic, and we have a true expert on this topic, Dr. Leslie Korn. Welcome to our show, Leslie.
Thank you so much.
It's such a pleasure to have you
here.
Oh, it's been a long time coming, and I'm really grateful that you're here to talk about this important issue and to talk about your fabulous book, which I was just sharing with Leslie that I've even been pulling out the book and using it as I've been recovering from my concussion, and it's just there's so much to learn here. So we're going to pack it in as much as we can get from you today. Sound good?
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed.
All right. Well, let me tell everybody just a little bit about you here. First of all, obviously, Leslie is the Korn. No. Dr. Leslie Korn, is the author of Nutrition Essentials for Mental Health by Norton Publishing as well. And it's a complete guide to the food-mood connection. So this is a fabulous resource. It's like a textbook. There's so much information in here, but very easy to read. So let me tell you a little bit more. She is a clinician specializing in mental health nutrition and integrative medicine. She is a core faculty member of Capella University's mental health counseling program. She served as a Fulbright Scholar on traditional medicine, a clinical fellow at Harvard Medical School, and a National Institutes of Health funded research scientist in mind-body medicine. And in 1975, she founded the Center for Traditional Medicine, which is a public health clinic in rural indigenous Mexico that she's been directing for over 25 years. She's also the author of 6 books total and teaches and consults internationally for mental health professionals and tribal communities. And you are actually residing in Mexico, are you not?
I do, yes.
Yeah, that's great. Full time?
I live in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico.
Oh, how wonderful. Okay, we're all jealous now.
Well, you'll come visit.
Oh, it's fabulous. I've only been there once, but we sure loved it. It's beautiful there. Wow. Okay, so let's just jump right in. And I thought we'd start by focusing on some of the basics for maternal or mom mental health through nutrition. So first of all, maybe we could start with, why is nutrition so important for all of us, but especially for moms and for children.
Indeed. Well, I think nutrition is central because it really supports our energy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we need as moms is energy. And the analogy that I like to use is that of a car. We fill our car up with gas and we expect it to move. And just as our bodies have engines, we need to lubricate, we need all reactions biochemically to we hum along just like we want to when we get it to go to the store. We don't pay that much attention to ourselves. We maybe pay more attention to our kids and what they may need, but we need to focus to sustain ourselves throughout each day.
Yeah, absolutely. And moms we need that energy so much. I think that's probably one of our biggest struggles, is to feel like we have enough energy to raise our families and be the kind of parents that we want to be. And then, our kids seem to have it in abundance when they're young, and how do we keep up? So I think that's a huge one. So can we go into a little bit about nutrition and the brain? I think that that's an important thing to understand. I mean, how does it work, so to speak? I love your analogy, but so how does that food go in there and actually nourish our brain and change our brain, and also the developing brain of our children?
Well, there are so many interactions. Let's focus on a few.
Okay.
One of the most important revolutions we're in the midst of right now that affect our brain is understanding that fat is not the enemy. We've come through perhaps 30 or 40 years of saying fat is bad for you, and a lot of low-fat diets. And yet our brain is 70% fat. Fat is a major source of energy, and it's very important for our physical health and our mental well-being. Indeed, low levels of fat early in childhood or early in infancy can contribute to learning disorders later in life. And so it's so important that we have good quality fats and not have poor quality fats to support the fatty connections in the brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right. I think fat has gotten a bad rap. We did. I mean, I went through that whole phase of that's how you dieted. That's how you lost the baby weight, was just going on a low fat diet. And so I think it's still ingrained in a lot of our minds that fat is the enemy, like you say. But like you say, there's also the healthy fats and then the unhealthy fats, and our brain needs those healthy fats, right?
That's right. And so that may inform some of our choices where we give whole fat raw milk to our children, obviously post breastfeeding, which is going to be ideal. And as a mother, taking in enough good healthy fats, we're going to share that with the fetus, but also after we give birth during breastfeeding. But then even as the child grows, that they have whole fat products, that we don't even go near these non-fat or low fat. And so when we have choices, we choose a nice raw pasture raised butter source, as opposed to, well, I don't think anyone listening is using margarine, but even some of the poorer quality kinds of butter substitutes or the like, so that we really begin to think about food as medicine for the brain and for the growing body, and that nature has given us everything that we need.
I love that. We just have to remember that and remind ourselves. That's the hard part. Now, I love that you're saying this about butter, because that was one thing that I actually took from your book when I was trying to, like I said, I turned to it thinking I need to figure out what foods are good for my brain, because I need my brain back. And I read that about butter and I was like, oh, fabulous. Okay, we have some great butter. And I thought, oh, good, I'm being told I can eat butter. It's actually good for my brain. Okay, I like that. So,
Yes, you have permission to eat butter. That's your prescription.
Woohoo!
And indeed, the thing that's so important about a good, let's say butter, for example, is a perfect example. I've never met anyone that said to me in my clinical office, oh, I don't want to eat that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
so especially when we're looking at what do we want to let go of? What kind of poor quality foods do we want to let go of? For example, canola oil. There's nothing medicinal about canola oil, but when I tell someone they can eat a good quality whole fat butter, either cow or goat butter, they are not unhappy. And I think that's one of the principles, is that for everything that we might let go of, that we have something that makes us satisfied and feel good. And the other thing that's so important about butter is that in order to absorb the important vitamins for the brain, vitamin A for immunity, also vitamin D, very essential for mental health in terms of depression and pain, vitamin E, so good for heart health, which fuels oxygen and circulation to the brain. We need saturated fat. The two go together. So it doesn't matter how much kale we might eat. If we're not eating the butter, we can't absorb the nutrients from the kale.
Wow. So we can cook the kale in butter, right?
Oh, I hope so.
Okay, that sounds pretty tasty, actually. I'll have to try that. So, okay, this is great, and you're dispelling a lot of these myths that we already have, that these foods are bad and we don't ever want to touch them, and we do. Then we substitute with things that really aren't whole foods, that aren't going to nourish our brains and aren't really going to be helpful for us. So I love that. So we've touched on a little bit on energy, a little bit on brain development, and what about sleep? That's a part of this too. And as moms, that's a huge issue. We are always needing more sleep, for sure.
It's a huge issue. And I think sleep is not a simple answer, especially for moms. There's no big fix with nutrition, but I've got just a few little hints.
Okay.
Keep in mind that we get energy from protein and fats, and that the starchy carbs help us relax. So, for example, eating oatmeal in the morning is going to put us to sleep, and yet using it at night is just when we want to eat it. Now, it's the opposite of what we often do, but this goes for us as moms, as grandmothers, but also for children. If we want a child to have energy during the day, a mom to have energy, focus on your proteins and your fats and your vegetables and fruits, and leave those starchy carbs, your sandwiches, your breads, your pastas for the evening meal, because that will create chemicals in the brain that help you rest and sleep.
Oh, very interesting. Okay.
And the one other thing to keep in mind is that we're often hypervigilant with our children. If they go to sleep, we're always listening with one ear for them. Of course, they may wake up and wake us up, but oftentimes we're so aware and attuned to them needing us in the night that our sleep is disrupted in the middle of the night. And even for years after that, once they are sleeping, we've been conditioned to wake up. And so one of the things that I also recommend is to eat a little bit of protein and carbohydrate right before you go to sleep, because sometimes we've exhausted our blood sugar. We have worn ourselves out during the day, and our blood sugar dips at night, maybe by 2 or 3 in the morning, and we wake up startled, and we might go check on our child. And yet it's really our own inner alarm that does not have the food in our system long enough to keep us sleeping. And so that's another hint that moms can use to sleep a little bit better throughout the night.
Those are great tips. Those are great ideas. And again, not things that we would normally think of doing. So that's what I love about all your advice here, is it's new. It's different for most of us. We haven't heard these suggestions before. And they're things that we can all do. They're not saying you have to go buy some expensive foreign food in order to be healthy. Mentally healthy. You can just use what you already have, but the when you eat it and the time of day and all of that can play into that energy sleep balance, right?
Indeed, yes.
So let's talk about let's get a little more specific and talk about that balance of proteins and carbs and fats, and maybe give some suggestions for start talking about some of the different kinds of foods that fall into these categories that moms might want to be looking to put into their bodies. One thing that I've learned as a mom with nutrition for me is I think we go into nutrition as a mom for, first of all, we're focusing a lot on what we want our kids to eat, obviously, and we're just trying to keep up. And a lot of times we're just not eating. We're not eating enough, or we're just not eating as often as we need to keep our energy going, or we're not able to, or we don't take the time to stop and put the good foods into our body. So to me, and then a lot of times again, I think with moms, nutrition falls into that weight loss category again. It's, if you're going to eat healthy, it's only because you want to lose baby weight or you want to look good again or get into physical shape. And so that's why I love this whole take on it as being for mental health and energy and sleep and all these things that we want as moms. So one thing that I like to focus on is, like you said, what am I putting into my body to give me that energy? And we've talked about sleep and exercise briefly. Sleep, exercise, and nutrition, I know you'd probably agree, are the three main ways that we get energy, right? So if we're not doing those things well, then we're not putting things into our body with our nutrition. It's not so much about yes, it's good to think about maybe what we shouldn't eat, but also really focus on what should we put into our bodies. And then maybe we'll be full enough with the good stuff that we don't even care so much for the other stuff. So let's get into some of those ideas, because I think a lot of people listening will be saying, okay, but what can I eat? How do I know what protein's good, or fats or carbs? How does that work?
I think there are a couple of main principles to think about. One is, I really trust my client. I trust moms to know what it is they need intuitively. It doesn't mean that we always act on it, because we're often looking to other people to say, this is the latest thing and this is the way to go. But one of the guiding principles of this work says that we are all different. We are all individuals. And let's go back to this car metaphor. I drive a Volkswagen, I've got an old Mercedes, and I have a new Honda. They all take different kinds of fuel. If I put the wrong fuel into my Mercedes diesel station wagon, it is going to die if I don't give it diesel. That represents a certain cultural genetic influence if we translate that to humans. Some of us are born at the North Pole, and we do very well with fat and blubber and very few fruits during the year and maybe some roots, but we're eating proteins and fats, and that's what keeps us energized. Others of us grew up in the tropics. We're going to do well with legumes and fruits and vegetables, and that's what's going to fuel our engine. So the first thing I suggest to moms is to really tune in to who you are and where you're from, because we're all a mix of the influence of our cultural heritage, which translates into genetic patterns. And what that means is, I might say, I feel really energized when I eat protein and vegetables. And someone might say, I really need to have a lot of carbs and beans in my diet to feel energized. And what that does is it takes the guesswork out of the type and amount of ratio of foods that we eat, because that means that some of us are natural carnivores and some of us are natural vegetarians. Now, if a natural carnivore is eating like a vegetarian, that's where we get into fatigue and low energy. Or if a vegetarian, genetically, culturally speaking, is eating like a carnivore, that's where we get into, again, fatigue and lethargy. And so I always ask, as the first step before any testing, is get in touch with what really you feel fuels you. The next step is, how do we do it with these busy lives? I am a big fan of crock pots.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Pots answer all our troubles when we are busy, because we can throw proteins and vegetables into a crock pot and top it with a little healthy fat at the end of the day. And we can throw it in the morning, and when we get home, or if we're home all day, we can tend to it. We can make bone broths. I love bone broths as a source of energy, because it gives us minerals, which are called the spark plugs of energy in the body. So these simple approaches that say, I'm going to plan a little bit in advance and choose my favorite foods, and even get one or two crock pots going at once, is a first step that I suggest to people who have really busy lives.
Oh, this is so great. So I want to break this down a little bit. So first of all, your point about being true to who we are nutritionally. I love that. It's so important because I think it is so easy, as you said, to get swayed by the latest trend or fad, or nowadays with social media, everybody's taking pictures of their food and putting it up, and you start thinking, I should be eating like this person. And I've even noticed with my children, I have one of my daughters is 13, and one of her friends was telling her about all the things that she shouldn't be eating, because this girl, she's sensitive to lactose, so she doesn't eat any kind of dairy, and my daughter's not. And so I was trying to explain to her, well, she has an allergy, and my husband, her dad, he is allergic to gluten, so he has celiac disease. So I'm like, just like Dad, he can't have that, but we can have it. It doesn't make us sick, And so it's so easy to get swayed, and so important for us to be true to, like you say, our cultural heritage, and also just our body, to tune into our body. That takes a lot of self-focus and kind of being aware of what we're feeling when we eat certain things, right?
Yes. And you're absolutely right that we have different members in our families with very diverse needs, that not everyone in the family comes through with the same influences. So you could have a carnivore in a family and a vegetarian in a family because of the mixture of the parents and what that then creates. And just to put just a dab of science into this for those of your listeners interested, this is based in the rate at which we digest carbohydrates. Some of us burn them very quickly, and some of us burn them very slowly. And that's the old Krebs cycle that we studied in biology. And so we all burn at a different rate. And so that's why we can have, I see many teenagers, for example, who have gone on to the vegan bandwagon because, and I can appreciate, I love animals. I don't want to eat animals. They are a gift when they give their bodies to me to eat, but I have a big heart for animals, and I work with a lot of teens who don't, and yet veganism can be a very big challenge, contributing to poor mental health in our teens and our college students as well. And if they're not oriented toward that type of nutrition, they will not do well.
Wow. This is such an important point. So there's genetics that's part of this, right? And obviously the family dynamics, and then how swayed we are by things, and how true we are to ourselves. And like you said, it's more complicated than we realize. And then that point you just made about how fast our body metabolizes the carbohydrates. And I know a lot of people are trying to, change that. Does that change, or is that something that we're born with and it just stays?
We're born with it.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. When you're born at the North Pole, you're an Inuit from beginning to end.
So you better just accept it and be where, go with it, right?
And it can alter a little bit, and that's the importance about diet. That's why we know when we feel off. For example, I work with a lot of women who want to get pregnant or who are pregnant, and they do not want to use medication. They may be depressed. The doctor's talking about going on a medication. They don't want to. They'd rather not. And there are so many natural things to do to not go on to medications. And so it often boils down to nutrition and also natural supplements that can do in the brain and the body what the medication can do, but even better, and without any negative side effects. And so it is really about aligning ourselves to who we are in all those ways.
Right. So that balance between proteins and carbs and fats, we do want to keep that balance, but that's going to be different for each of us, essentially.
Yeah. So some of us will do very well eating higher fat and protein and low carbs. Some of us will do much better eating high carbs, moderate fat, and moderate protein. Again, think about your 97 octane, your diesel fuel. It's going to be subtle. And some of us, we will go on for many years, oftentimes out of balance, but it doesn't send us over the edge. But that's where pregnancy can send us over the edge because it draws on so much. And so, for example, postpartum depression, which is part and parcel of being so depleted post-pregnancy, and where the nourishment is so essential. So some of us come in the world, and people like this, they can debauch their whole lives, and they live a merry life drinking and smoking and eating whatever they want until they're 100, and then they go.
Yeah.
Some of us are much more sensitive and need to be much more finely attuned to our reactivity to foods and exposures.
That's true. Oh, that's such a good point. And I hope everybody listening, I hope you guys are soaking this in and starting to wonder for yourself, what are my genetics all about, and how fast do I process these carbs, and what balance do I need of carbs and proteins and fats? And maybe you've been trying the latest fad or some new kind of thing and it's not working for you. And I hope that you're going to take courage from what Dr. Korn is saying here and be true to what really is going to work for you, and put those good foods into your body that are going to help you feel mentally well. I really appreciate that. And I appreciated you mentioning the bone broth. That's another thing I did when I've made broths before, but I've never tried to like crunch up and get the nutrients from the bones in that way. But that's great for your brain, right? So.
Oh, it is. And, especially because food's expensive. Good quality food's expensive, and that's an issue too. How do we feed our families using good quality organic foods that don't bring in toxins, that don't bring in endocrine disruptors, that cause premature puberty? How do we do this in a way that we can afford? And bones, organic bones, are one of the least expensive things that you can buy, and yet give you more nourishment than almost anything. And so you've got a nice combination there in making a bone broth. And it's as simple as just throwing them in the crock pot. Yeah. And then when it's done, you add some of your leafy greens, and you've got a wonderful broth that can then be the source of soups. You can drink it just as is. The other thing is, I was drinking my bottle of water. I wanted to mention that an unknown cause of fatigue among moms is being dehydrated. And I want to give you the ratio of how much water we should all be drinking. Great. You take your weight and you divide it by 50%, and that amount in ounces is how much water we should drink a day. So a 150-pound person should drink about 75 ounces of water a day. One of the biggest causes of fatigue and headaches is not drinking enough water.
And that's so simple. And I mean, I'm lucky. I love water. It's my favorite drink. So I pretty much only drink water. I know a lot of people don't love it, but you could put a little flavor in it or whatever you need to do to get it down. But we don't think of that. And of course, when you're running around, chasing after kids, trying to keep up, going to work, whatever you're doing, it's really easy to forget to keep drinking. But like you say, you just, in the video, for those of you who can't see the video, she just held up her water. She's got it right there. So if we can just have it ready and with us, then we're more likely. And I would suggest also starting early in the day. That's why I love exercising in the morning. It makes me start off the day by drinking a lot of water, and then I can, get my water in easily. So that's another tip. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, one of the hints I share is early in the morning, if you can, or late at night, fill up your quart jars and place them all throughout the house. Everywhere that you spend time during the day, or you can put them in your car if you're going off to work. And you always have a jar wherever you are that's catching your eye and reminding you, in your bedroom, in the bathroom, in the living room, in the baby's nursery, wherever you are. Just keep full jars, and it helps you get the job done.
That's great. And you'll always be reminded like that. I love it. So here's my next question. So we talked about this, this kind of finding what kind of fuel works for you, right? Whatever works for your body. Now, does this change according to the different phases of our life? When we're children, when we're teenagers, is it common for those things to kind of change a little bit and our needs to change in general?
As a general rule, we have similar needs. We could certainly change if we get ill or something, or as an athlete, you might have more need for protein the more you work out, or even carbohydrates or different times of day.
Right.
I think in general, though, our needs are relatively the same for good quality fats, good quality proteins, vegetables, fruits. And many people are very sensitive to grains. As you point out, your husband's sensitive to gluten. And I think it's very important early on to identify these sensitivities, because what happens, as you know, with these sensitivities, and the major ones are generally due to cow dairy and to gluten. We know that there are people who are severely allergic to these substances, but we also know there are a good percentage of people that are called sensitive to them.
Yeah.
And if we're sensitive to them, they will cause an inflammatory process in the body. And what goes on in the body goes on in the brain. Right. We know, for example, that 50% of people with a diagnosis of schizophrenia are sensitive to gluten. Wow. And so, speaking of kind of the life stages, I think it's very important early on with our children to identify if there are these sensitivities and to find good substitutions. I think one of the challenges we have at the life stage called teenager,
yes,
is getting them to eat, or to eat good food. There's so many other influences. Yeah. And so that all begins early. But nonetheless, there's always individuation and rebellion.
Yes.
One of the ways I like to get good quality nutrients into my teens is to make smoothies, because I can get every vitamin, mineral, and amino acid complement, and that's especially good for ADHD diagnosis, which, by the way, I think is way overdiagnosed.
Right.
I think mostly it's poor nutrition, but that's another, we can go off and talk about that.
Absolutely.
But I think the main way to get really good nutrients into our teens is to make them a really delicious smoothie every day. And then I can put in powdered nutrients, and I can put in liquid fish oil or liquid coconut oil. I have some really great recipes in my book that include chocolate and stevia, so it's a nice chocolate sweet, and there's coconut, there may be vanilla in it. I could add banana if I want, or berries, whatever those variations that the teens will enjoy. And then I put in their special nutrients that are going to sustain them, help them focus, relax them at the same time as they have energy. And so I think when you ask that question, I think more about how do we get these foods that we need throughout our life cycle?
Yeah.
And rather than that they change quite so much, because a smoothie like that, boy, we could use something like that throughout our lives.
Oh, yeah. That's a great afternoon snack for a mom right there,
It is. For a mom, I'll often suggest that she might make it a little mocha, because my favorite, I love to say, coffee is a drug. It's not a beverage. So let's recognize that we're using coffee as a drug to lift our energy, to lift our mood, and to improve our focus. But if we drink too much of it and we rely on it too much, then it just fatigues us and makes us anxious at the same time. So use it judiciously in your afternoon mocha with coconut and chocolate and stevia and a little bit of coffee, and it really helps you get through that low energy period of 3 or 4 or 4:30 in the afternoon.
Oh, that's great. That's so great. What a great tip. I love it. And I'm a fan of smoothies myself. In fact, I started adding a green drink mix to my morning smoothie instead of having my Greek yogurt and my fruit and my, this way I can have it on the go. And it's great when I'm driving my kids around, I can be drinking my breakfast. So
yes, I love that. And speaking of green drink, the other thing that you can get is a powdered green tea, very good quality green tea in powder form. And green tea is a very interesting substance because it both stimulates you and relaxes you at the same time. And so unlike coffee that can make you jittery, it's very good for teens who need to focus, but also stay relaxed. And also for us throughout the day, it lifts our mood, lifts our energy, but we stay very relaxed as we drink it. And I add a teaspoon or maybe half a teaspoon of this green tea powder to my smoothies for that purpose.
That's great. I didn't know that about green tea, that it had that calming effect as well. Yeah. Okay, that's great. And you know, I think that caffeine, I'm so glad you brought up the caffeine bit, because I think that's such an important part for moms. And you're right, it's about how you use it, and whether it be coffee or soda or whatever kind of caffeine you're just pumping through your veins. It can become a crutch. It can be something that's unhealthy. It can make anxiety worse, like you said. It can contribute to mental illness, or it can be used in these smart ways to help you, you know, and there's a difference there. So I think that was a really great point. Now, before we move on and talk about children for a few minutes, and I did want to go back to that ADHD question, because I know a lot of moms have that question. I just wanted to ask, and you just talked about a green tea powder. You mentioned a few things for the smoothie, but as far as supplements, what are a few that you highly recommend? I'm sure fish oil is on the list, right? Because we know that is wonderful for mental health, right?
Fish oil's on the list. The thing that people don't often do is supplement it with what's called a GLA oil, gamma linoleic acid. For example, evening primrose oil or borage oil or hemp oil, for example. 3 very important complementary oils to the fish oil. The other thing for moms who are fatigued, I think at a very basic level, is an adrenal supplement. And you can get that in either a botanical form. For example, rhodiola is a botanical that will act almost like coffee. So let's say you're caffeine sensitive, or you want to reduce the amount of caffeine or don't want to have it too late in the afternoon. Rhodiola is a wonderful botanical that you can get in a tea or a tincture form that will lift your energy. An adrenal supplement in terms of a glandular, we can get adrenal glands in dehydrated form. And so there's a wonderful product that combines botanicals and glands of animals to support our energy. And for an exhausted mom, this may be a very good first place to go, along with a comprehensive B vitamin and mineral. That's where you begin. B vitamins and minerals, I think, are the place you begin. You support with some of your oils. You might have an amino acid formula as well, something called free amino acids, because those are designed to boost your energy and boost your brain function.
Great. Yeah, that's wonderful. And so moms can go to a health food store and ask about these different products, basically, or look online, or where do you suggest they start if they're wanting to go find out about some of these?
Well, let's look at another analogy about products and nutrients. You can eat a hamburger from McDonald's, or you can go to your local CSA or farm where they're doing humanely raised, organic, pasture-raised animals that are humanely slaughtered. So we've got a spectrum of quality. We might call them both hamburger, but they're very different. Right. And I believe that we should always use the highest quality that we can access, even if it means that we use less of it or don't use as many things. I think in the long run, that will benefit us. So that said, I think there are some very good quality products in a health food store. The other thing that I suggest is that people organize a nutrient buying co-op. Nutrients are very expensive and the markup is very high in a health food store. Organize and see if you can then order as a group, or maybe find a licensed clinician who can order what are called pharmaceutical grade products at a much lesser cost because you're buying in bulk. So there are very creative ways to obtain very high quality nutrients. Wow. Because as you know, for example, buying fish oil in capsules is more expensive than buying it in liquid form. And so I always suggest buy it in the liquid form, add it to your smoothies. You'll save money that way. Yeah. And there are, in my book, I mention what I think are the best suppliers of these products and who really has the standards and the controls, because we want those controls on these products.
Right, absolutely. Well, they're like medicines helping us to be well, right? So we want them to
Yes,
be working the rest.
we want to know what we're taking. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I mean, yes, her book is the reference to go to for all of this. If you want more specific information on anything we've been talking about, that's definitely where you want to go. So, okay. So before we wrap up, let's get back to that question about behavior in children and nutrition. I agree with you that ADHD is so often diagnosed now, and I have seen wonders worked by children whose parents have really worked to change their diet. And it really can impact behaviors. So tell us a little bit about that link there and what maybe some of the parents who are listening might want to try or where they can begin.
Okay, this is my passion because I work with so many people to stay off medications or get off of them. Yeah. And I think we do have a massive epidemic of misdiagnosis and overdiagnosis. And what we often call ADHD is often due to stress and traumatic events in the child's life, along with poor nutrition. And so one of the things we didn't really touch upon was the use of the idea of foods that are stimulating and inflammatory, like white sugar and white flour. Again, the principle of substitutions. It's not that you can't have sweet things or candies and cakes, but make sure they're made out of ingredients that aren't going to be called what we do call excitotoxins. They excite the brain. For example, aspartame, one of the major ingredients in all the diet sodas, should never be touched by anyone. I would rather someone drink a Coke with sugar than drink a Diet Coke with aspartame. We know that it triggers an effect in the brain that causes behavioral responses and mood disorders. And so it's very dangerous. And so when I'm working with children with this diagnosis, the first thing is I want to look at their diet and see what could be triggering these behaviors. And then we slowly help them release these different foods and then nourish them. We know, for example, that fats and proteins are grounding. And so what I mentioned earlier, don't send a child off to school with cereal and milk. They need bacon and eggs. Eggs are the perfect food. I always ask my parents to give children 2 eggs a day, 1 to 2 eggs a day. They are the perfect food for the brain. They support the brain. And speaking of the full life, they're perfect through the for the older generation as well, throughout the life cycle.
Protect your brain when you're older, as we need it, right?
Protect your
Absolutely.
brain, yes. And so the other piece, and this intersects, Christy, your work with exercise. Exercise, along with nutrition, is the missing piece. Together, they form the basis for treatment for ADHD. We certainly have a lot of exposures that are stressing children out, but I think primarily we want to support their brain to focus. I love mindfulness and yoga. I often will suggest the martial arts for teens or young children with this diagnosis. Why? We ask our children to sit still. We've done away with the arts. We've done away with movement. It's not natural. And then we say, why aren't you behaving? Right. But children need to express their energy. They need to move. And in the movement, they release chemicals that balance out brain function, balance out focus and attention. And so I will 99.9% of the time always disagree with an ADHD diagnosis until we can tease out the effects of all of these influences on a teen's life. And so I mentioned smoothies with specific nutrients, with amino acids. There is no reason to put a child on medication, and we know medications are harmful for the developing brain. There are alternatives.
Yeah, and why not start there? You know, if you're not sure if you can do it without the medication, then why not start there? Why not start with nutrition and exercise? And you know, it's not only going to help your child be healthier, you're going to have to be the model as well. So it's going to make the whole family healthier as well. I really appreciate that. That's such an important point for our children. And I appreciated what you say about about the stress in our children's lives and how we minimize that. And we tend to think it's a mental illness issue when really it's just they probably need to get some energy out. They need something better, more energy put in the right way, or they need to be able to help them handle the stress that they face. It's a stressful
Yes,
world.
and as a psychologist, that it's often the more behavioral issues in the child that reflect a great deal of creativity and actually predict a healthier life than the child that's just sitting there doing everything they're told to do, like a good little boy or girl. We want our children to reflect how they're feeling in their behavior, and then help them interpret it, process it, and find meaning from it. We don't want these obedient little
Yes. Exactly. We need to let them just be children and be themselves, just like we need to do the same for ourselves. Well, I so appreciate that. And, I wanted to just follow up. You mentioned inflammation a couple of times. And as you know, there's just this fabulous research that shows that inflammation is at the root of depression and mental illness. And so when we're talking about putting foods in our body that help reduce inflammation or that don't cause inflammation, we're really literally we're treating that or preventing those kinds of mental illnesses as well as health issues, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We know that depression is the end point that begins many years earlier of stress and inflammation, and that there are certain foods, as you say, the white sugar, white flour, the soda, all of this causes low-level inflammation in the body. Think of like a little fire that's always burning, and over the number of years can ultimately lead to depression and chronic illness. And then we have an epidemic of so-called high cholesterol, and people want to treat it with statins, but cholesterol is really a function of inflammation. There's nothing wrong with cholesterol. It's the inflammation in the body that the cholesterol is acting like a Band-Aid to patch up. And so understanding all of these connections is so important, so that we don't suppress symptoms, but we interpret them. And this, I think, is revolution discovered with inflammation, is that our gut creates all these wonderful chemicals for our brain, that our digestion is central to our mental health. And that's why eating lots of fermented foods creates the relaxation chemicals for the brain. And that's why I encourage. It's not that you can't have hot dogs and pickles. Make sure they're organic hot dogs or good quality sauerkraut. Again, the substitutions idea. We can have a soda that we make with lithium-rich sparkling water and stevia, and add some berries, anti-inflammatory berries too. We don't need to have a Coca-Cola, but it means detoxifying from what we're addicted to.
Right. Oh, so important and so very hard. And there's so much to all this. I appreciate that. It's a gentle approach. It's, I love what you're saying. It's not go and throw everything out of your house and change everything today. It's like you say, it's substituting one thing for another, something better for the thing that's not as good.
Yes, indeed. We have to be gentle with ourselves, and we know how long and how much work it takes to change. But especially doing it as a family. We just cooked the other day, made an apple cake with our 4-year-old, and had so much fun. And so engaging the family in the whole process ensures that we succeed.
Yeah. That's a great place to wrap up, I think. Well, thank you, Dr. Leslie Korn, for being here on Motherhood and for sharing all these wonderful ideas. I know we just scratched the surface because I'm holding your book here. And for those in the video, you can see this is a big book. There's a lot of information in here. Nutrition Essentials for Mental Health by Norton Publishing. And you can find that online all over the place pretty much, right?
Yes, and yes. And on Amazon and at Norton, anywhere that you look.
And your website, which I forgot to mention earlier, a great website to check out is healthalt.com, as in alternative, healthalt.com, for more information on, a lot of these topics we're talking about today, and also to connect with Dr. Korn. So thank you, Leslie, for being here. I really appreciate it, and for sharing all this with us.
Thank you, Christy. My pleasure. We'll talk again soon.
I hope so. I hope so. And for all of you listening, thank you for joining us. We are so grateful when you come and grow through motherhood with us instead of just going through it on your own. It's a lot better to do it together as we do each week here on Motherhood Radio. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.